Hello friends, in this video I'm going to talk about saving money by making upgrades to your own computer and extending the longevity of it. So what prompted me to make this video is I was contemplating actually upgrading my entire computer, buying all new parts because I had built it 8 years ago and it's starting to show its age. So I was just gonna completely gut all the parts and just buy all new everything. That way it's modernized. But got to thinking, well, maybe I could just do a couple upgrades and get another couple years out of it. And that's the route I've decided to go. I've decided to get a new graphics card and then also replace my RAM because I got a couple of blue screens within the past couple of months and it takes Windows like 5 minutes to load. So I'm hoping that replacing that will fix that. So I wanted to just do a video talking about some of the upgrades you can do to save some money, and then also this is kind of going to be a video aimed more at if you've never opened a computer before, or maybe you have and you've looked at the components but you don't know what you're looking at. I'm going to go into detail on what all these components do and what are some of the ones you can replace to save a little bit of money if they start showing their age. And it's pretty easy to replace these parts. Everything's fairly modular and just snaps into place. Really, it looks intimidating, but it's really simple. You just the thing that takes the most effort is doing research to make sure you're buying the correct part and the one that you want. And another factor would be, well, how cheap do you want to get it at? If you also want to factor in price, well, then you're also gonna have to keep an eye out and monitor the price of all of these parts. But really, right now is a great time to build a new PC. The market is very competitive right now for CPUs, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. But yeah, so let's just get into it. The first part we'll talk about is we'll just go straight for the CPU. So the CPU is, you can think of the brains of the computer. It handles all of the processing and computations and does all of the thinking of the computer. And that's under here, under this giant heat sink. So you can just pull that off. Oh, also I've disconnected all of the wires, so these would typically all be hooked up here. I'll go into detail on that as well later, but I've disconnected everything just so nothing's in the way. Also, this is not my computer. This is a old computer I dug out of storage because there used to be a fan here and I wanted to use that fan on my computer. So I've removed that, installed that in my computer. This is a very outdated computer. So it will, despite that, it will be a good example because all of these parts are looks fairly the same still today. So it'll be good to demonstrate. So back to the CPU. So you can just remove this by pulling up on the little lever here, and it just comes right out. You can see all of these little pins in there. And again, this is what does the thinking. And this one is an AMD. The other brand you may have heard of is Intel. And these two are competitors, and the competition is increasing right now. Like, AMD is really stepping up their game. And whenever I was doing research, if I were to go and build a new computer today, I'd probably go with the AMD Ryzen processors because they're supposed to be better than the Intels right now. So yeah, if you do take off the heatsink, so that's what this is. This is your heatsink that sits over the CPU. If you do take this off in your computer, you're going to want to make sure you have some new thermal paste ready to apply once you put that back in there, because once you put this back in here, you need to, well, actually before you put it back in there, you need to clean off the old thermal paste. You'll see on the back of this where the old thermal paste was. You need to clean that off and apply new thermal paste. And what that does is it makes sure that there's good contact between the processor and the heat sink, and this is just a giant block of aluminum, and that'll help the heat to dissipate. And then you've also got the fan on there that will again help to get rid of that heat. Alright, next we'll go on to the RAM up here. So there are two main types of memory. You've got RAM and then you've got a hard drive. And the way to think about it is the RAM is more of like short-term memory, whereas your hard drive is long-term memory. So this is what gets used for your applications that are up and running. That way we have quick access to it. It allows us to have much quicker access to this information here stored in RAM than stored on disk. There's a lot of latency pulling data from this. So also something that differentiates it is that this memory is only used whenever the computer is powered up. So once you turn your computer off, anything in this memory goes away. Whereas, so before you shut down and you go to save, everything's being stored off to disk. And that's why it's good to do a restart every now and then if you are a person who lets your computer run nonstop, because there's probably applications out there that aren't efficient at cleaning up after itself, and it could be clogging up your memory. So if you're noticing that your computer is starting to slow down a little bit, a restart's always good, because then it's going to completely erase everything that's in memory here, and then it's going to be like starting fresh. And you might notice that everything runs quicker because it's unclogged all of that memory that was being used, that really was just not being cleaned up by whatever applications you're running. And these are really easy to install and take out. You just push on these tabs here and they just pop out, you can see. And then to just insert it, you just do the reverse, where you just would align it with the slot, push down, and then also help these tabs to go back into place. So there are different types of RAM out there. Like the latest is DDR4. This is probably DDR2. So that's something to watch out for if you are wanting to upgrade your RAM. The reason why you'd want to upgrade your RAM is, say that your computer is running not as quick as you would like it to. Well, adding more RAM, like if some computers might have 4 of these slots. You can see this one has 2. Some computers have 2, some have 4. So if you had additional slots, you could add more RAM, and that could help out your computer to become faster, because now it can store more of that application data in RAM and have more access to it, instead of having to do where it kind of goes in between having it in your RAM and having to go out to disk. So that could help it out. You could also upgrade by, say that these are just 4 gig sticks for a total of 8 gigs here. If your motherboard supports adding higher levels of RAM, what you could do is then instead get 2 8 gig sticks for a total of 16 gigs. And that would give you more RAM. But the thing to watch out for is, like my motherboard it has 2 slots, and it supports a max of 8 gigs. So each stick can be a max of 4 gigs. If I put in any more than that, it's not going to take advantage of it, because it can't support that much. So that's something else to watch out for. That would be in the documentation for your motherboard, which that's what this is. This is what connects all of the components together, and even your hard drive here. I don't have it connected, but there'd be a wire coming from the hard drive to your motherboard here. But yeah, so that's something to watch out for, is like the version of RAM that you have, and then also what's the max amount of RAM you can fit in your motherboard. So next I'll talk about the power supply unit, which is right here. Some cases it could be on the bottom here and the motherboard is shifted up, so it just depends on what kind of case you get. So this you can think of as the mitochondria of the computer, because it's the powerhouse. And so it's going to, again, I removed all of these cables just so they wouldn't be in the way, but these power supply units are going to come with pretty much every connection you possibly need for your computer. So like this one here connects to your motherboard right here, It's very easy to plug in. It's just snaps right into place. So yeah, so that's in there. You've also got these ones that connect to like your hard drives. You can see this just goes in there. You've even got ones that will connect to your graphics card, which I'll talk about in a moment, like this one here. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But right now I'm gonna disconnect all of these. So yeah, the power supply, on the back here, you'll see where it's got the connectors for a cable, and you would connect that to a power outlet. Something to be aware of is the wattage of these. So depending on what kind of things you're hooking up to the power supply, like how much energy they draw, you may need a higher wattage power supply unit. So that would be like if you get a graphics card that, and they say in the specifications of the graphics card what the wattage is you need of a power supply unit. So that's something to be aware of. But other than that, it's just a box that delivers power to your computer. So we'll move on to, I talked about graphics card, we'll move on to graphics cards, and that's what this is here. Now the graphics cards come in different sizes. This one is a very small one, but they get much bigger than this, so we'll take this one out, and to remove it you just pull straight out. There it is, there's the card. You can see we have these different slots here. This one's an AGP slot. These are old. These have been replaced by PCI Express, but this is specific to the graphics card. And then down here we have the PCI slots, and I'll get on to talk about these in a moment. Still focusing on the graphics card. So here you can see we have a VGA output. These are kind of getting dated. HDMI is more common in what you would see now. This is a small one, and graphics cards, what they allow us to do is to like play games or edit video or anything graphics intensive. The more graphics intensive things you do, the bigger graphics card you'd want to get. So not that many big things were being done with this one, since it's just a little tiny one. And this one, since it is so small, the power is being delivered by the slot itself, this AGP slot. Whereas these bigger ones, they're going to require you to hook them up to the power supply. And that would be, on this one, we've got a 6-pin, if I can find that. So here it is. So you can see this 6-pin one. Nowadays, well, it might just be like the bigger graphics cards at least require an 8-pin plug. But you can just get a simple adapter for that, and you're good to go. You just hook it up to that, and yeah, put it in the slot, and you're good. So another thing I want to talk about before we move on to these cards is you'll notice on the motherboard itself, it's got a, is that a VGA? No, that's not a VGA. Never mind. I thought that was a VGA output, but it's not. So never mind. But on other motherboards, you might notice that there are already like HDMI outputs or a VGA output, and wonder, well, why would I want to get a card and whenever the motherboard already has it on there? And that's because the motherboard is the output for video is going to be very basic, probably just for web browsing. But if you want to play games, it's not going to be able to handle that. You're going to need to get a card that can do all of that processing. So that's the reason for that. And we'll move on to the PCI slot. So what these allow you to do is to really expand the functionality of your computer. So say that you feel that there's not enough USB ports on your computer. You can get a card that has a bunch of USB ports and install it, and just like that, you've got a bunch of USB ports that you can now use. This one has, looks like we got a network card in here, but then this goes back to my point of, you might say, well, my motherboard has a network port on it, so why do I need to go get a separate card and install that when my motherboard already has that? And that could be, in this case, this was probably an upgrade, adding this card, because maybe your motherboard might only be able to handle so much bandwidth, and that would limit your internet speeds. So if you want faster internet speeds, you'd want to get a network card, put it in there, and then you have faster internet. So these cards are the same pretty much as that AGP slot as for taking them out and installing them. You just pull straight up and they come right out. To install them, you just align them with the slot and just push firmly straight down. And yeah, you're good to go. You're not gonna break anything as long as you're not being too forceful. But yeah, it should just pop right into place. Kind of going back to how I was saying, everything is just fairly modular, just pops right into place as it should. Next, I'll talk about the hard drive here. So I've again disconnected the wires, but you have that where I showed you we connect the power supply up to it here, and then there's an additional cable that would connect it to the motherboard. This is a very old hard drive because it's got a IDE cable that it requires. That's now been replaced by SATA, which is a lot smaller, but it uses this large ribbon cable that you have to connect it here and then also connect it here to the motherboard. So it's obnoxious with how big it is. The SATA cables are like that thick, much smaller. So yeah, you can see the hard drive bay where you could fill all of these up with hard drives in here. And then up here we've got the disk drive bays. So this is where if you still have a disk drive in your computer even, that's where this would go. And you can see I've got the front of this turned off. Some more wires, so we've got wires for the power button, some lights to show that it's on and loading, and then also USB ports and a headphone and microphone jack. And those would just come back here, and you can see these connectors here would just connect somewhere on the motherboard. I don't know where exactly, just it would be listed in the documentation, but you can see like these pins, like these pins down here, and that's where they would connect to. Yeah, you can see like this, here's where the reset, that one that's connected there, that blue and white one, that's for the reset switch. So those just pop off and you can just pop them back on. But again, refer to your user's manual on where to connect everything. So that's pretty much it for the components. It's really not that much. You need your power, you need your processing unit for doing the computations, you need your memory, your two different types, you need your graphics, your video if applicable. Otherwise you could just resort to what's on the motherboard, integrated in with the motherboard, and then just some expansion slots if you need them. But yeah, so I was again looking at just completely upgrading my computer. I was going to spend about $1,000 total on all new parts, but going this route with just trying to get a couple more years out of it, and doing a couple small upgrades, it's only going to be about $200. So you can see here's my actual computer, and you can see how big this graphics card is. You can see where the wires connected to my motherboard are actually bumping right up against it. Whenever I first got it in here, I was actually kind of worried because I thought there wasn't enough slack going from the PSU on up to the motherboard, but I was able to make it work. You can see this graphics card has an 8-pin connector, but my PSU only has 6, so I did have to buy an adapter. You can see that connected there. But yeah, very similar as what we're looking at on that older computer with the RAM right there, the CPU right there, there's the fan. Well, no, that's not the fan. This one up here is the one that I stole off of it. I do have a disk drive because I did build this 8 years ago, and I think disk drives were still a thing back then. 2 hard drives, one of them went bad, so I just left it in there and then put the new one in there. You can see my SATA. I had to move. There's 2 SATA ports that the disk drive and the hard drive were originally connected to, but I had to move because this graphics card now covers those up. So thank goodness there were two down here that I could move it to. But now there's really no room to use that other PCI slot. Especially, I don't want to, there's fans on the bottom here that I don't want to cover up. And then you can see that's what a PCI Express looks like. It's a lot longer than an AGP. And then again, the RAM will be getting swapped out whenever I get that next week. And I'm really hoping that that'll fix my issue with it occasionally blue screening and getting just really long load time for Windows to get loaded. But after that, it seems to work fine. But yeah, so that's the video on computer basics and saving money by doing your own upgrades. We'll see you next time.